In this lesson, we will be looking at human behaviour, the way that decisions are made, the errors that humans make, and the ways in which those errors can be reduced. It is a very important topic in practice because approximately 70% of aircraft crashes are caused by human error. Human reliability can be defined as an individual functioning in the manner in which he is supposed to function. Studies of human error rates during the performance of a simple and repetitive task show that errors can normally be expected to occur about once in 100 times. This error rate is built into the human system and can increase with stress, fatigue, and other factors. But the error rate can also be reduced with practice, so that a frequency of 1 in 1,000 may be regarded as achievable. Factors which affect reliability are length of time of exposure to risk, degree of risk, mental and physical health, innate psychological characteristics, innate physiological characteristics, personality deficiencies, stress factors, experience, motivation, and skill level. If humans do not perform reliably, that is, they perform a mental or physical activity which does not achieve its intended effect, then we describe this as an error. Errors may be inconsequential, such as when a child is asked to turn off a cold water tap, but closes the hot water tap instead. But they may be catastrophic, as when workers at a nuclear power plant at 3 Mile Island in the USA in 1979 incorrectly closed cooling pipe valves to a reactor, which led to a meltdown of the core of the reactor. It is not surprising, therefore, that wherever possible, rules, procedures, and checklists are used to minimize human error, particularly where complex tasks are involved. Aircraft operation handbooks are a good illustration of this. Errors tend to be cumulative in nature. That is, the original error will tend to cause other errors to follow. For example, an erroneous maintenance procedure may lead to several accidents. This is known as an error chain. Not following the correct operational procedures led to the worst nuclear accident ever in Chernobyl in 1986, which resulted in thousands of deaths. Isolated errors have no further consequences, such as taking up a flower instead of a weed in a flower bed. Errors can be categorized in many ways, but the JAA refer to the following 4 types: faults, violations, slips, and omissions, and we will look at each in turn. The action taken satisfies the operator's intention, but the intention itself was incorrect. For example, flaps may be extended perfectly, but what was needed was to lower the undercarriage. A common cause of faults is an error of perception, such as misjudging the width of a runway, which results in landing either too short or too long on the runway. The pilot has performed his action as planned, but it was unintentionally the wrong action. Violations are also intention errors, but they are a case of intentionally taking the wrong action. They are a conscious breach of the rules or regulations, such as not following checklists or ignoring air traffic instructions. Slips, also known as lapses or action errors, are actions which are carried out incorrectly, such as instead of selecting 10-degree flaps, 30-degree flaps are selected. The action does not satisfy the intention, although the intention was correct. Finally, omissions, which are self-explanatory. For example, missing out an item on a checklist. Interruptions are frequently a cause of omissions. What then causes these errors? Broadly speaking, error generation can be caused by either internal or external factors. Internal factors can be either traits, which are relatively unchanging personal characteristics, or states, which are considered to be more or less within the control of the individual. Examples of traits are personality, lack of talent, inexperience, excess zeal, and lack of current experience. Examples of states are fatigue, drink or drug effects, life stress, and under or over arousal. External factors are those beyond the control of the individual, such as stress factors or stressors. This would include noise, family problems, and high or low task demand. Further examples of external factors that can lead to errors are company pressure, crew incompatibility, poor training, poor displays, and poor controls and equipment. The type of error made by an individual is very closely linked to the type of his behaviour at the time. Jens Rasmussen, a Danish ergonomics author, introduced a three-level activity control model in the 1980s, the SRK model, which is particularly suitable for explaining pilots' learning techniques and their actions. The key distinction for Rasmussen between these three types of behaviour is whether or not the individual is engaged in problem-solving at the time that the error occurred. In brief, skill-based behaviour is automatic. Rule-based behaviour is that for which a routine or procedures have been learned and are being followed, whilst knowledge-based behaviour requires the solving of a problem for which no procedures exist. Let us look at skill-based behaviour. Rasmussen states that behaviour at the skill-based level represents sensory-motor performance during acts or activities that take place without conscious control, as smooth, automated, and highly integrated patterns of behaviour. Riding a bike or an experienced pilot flying straight and level are examples of this. Errors in skill-based behaviour do not normally occur in novices, because they have to think about each action, and therefore the action is not automatic, and does not fall into the definition of skill-based behaviour. A necessary condition for the occurrence of a slip in skill-based behaviour is the presence of attentional capture, associated with either distraction or preoccupation. This means that wherever else the limited attentional resource is being directed at that moment, it will not be focused on the routine task in hand. Have you ever put the milk back in the cupboard and put the sugar in the fridge? Or have you gone upstairs to fetch something, then forgotten what it was you wanted? These are automatic actions, but there has been some unconscious distraction. Because virtually all adult actions have skill-based components, most errors are skill-based slips, and they generally involve a necessary departure from some well-established routine, such as automatic scanning of the ground in front of the feet while walking. Slips may be occasioned either by an intended deviation from normal practice, or by an alteration in the physical circumstances in which a routine is customarily executed. An example of an intended deviation would be agreeing to make a cup of coffee for a colleague, whilst you personally drink tea. You return from the kitchen with 2 cups of tea. An example of an alteration in physical circumstances would be a pilot who is used to an aircraft with a 3-position fuel selector, left, right, off, flying an aircraft with only 2 positions, on, off. He is told of the new settings and says he understands, but when it comes to the time he normally changes tanks, he turns the fuel to the off position. The reason for the slips is clear. When making the tea, you fail to make an attentional check on your plan at the point where the initial common pathway, boiling the kettle, branched into making tea or coffee. In the case of the fuel selector, it was a failure to recall the changes in the environment, probably because of all the other things going on. The slips in these 2 examples arose because knowledge related to these changes was not accessed at the appropriate time, due almost invariably to attentional capture or distraction. In order to avoid such slips, checklists are prepared and type rating training is required. Many airlines limit their pilots to 3 types of aircraft at any one time because of the risk of information overload, occasioning slips. Rule-based and knowledge-based behaviour are only called into play after the individual has become conscious of a problem. Rule-based behaviour will be controlled by existing rules, such as a take-off drill. Knowledge-based behaviour deals with non-standard problems. That is, events that have no procedure, such as a mid-air collision. Rule-based behaviour is that for which a routine or procedure has been learned. Unlike skill-based behaviour, rule-based behaviour always requires a conscious decision to initiate the behaviour. Consider the case of being asked to fly from Denham to Shoreham. One cannot say, "I've never done that before. I can't go." The rule-based behaviour solution would require you to follow set procedures for correct preparation of the flight. Reference will be made to the correct maps and documents to obtain the required information of the route. The relevant NOTAMs will be checked, the weather information collated, details of the destination aerodrome will be looked up, and so on. Flying SIDS and STARS are good examples of rule-based behaviour. In short, pilots have rules and procedures which regulate both normal flight, such as Hazel checks before a stall practice, and abnormal flight, such as emergency drills. The rules are usually written down, and the more frequently used may be stored in the long-term memory, perhaps in the form of a mnemonic, such as FRIDA, the en route check. It is in the field of procedural training, that is rule-based behaviour, that simulation is used most frequently, since pilots cannot thoroughly practice emergencies whilst actually flying. Some procedures are too complicated to be reliably memorised, and thus they must be kept in some documentary form, such as checklists. Even in these cases, the pilot must retain a basic memory of how to access the correct information, for example by understanding the index. Thus, the general practice is to learn the immediate actions for an emergency, such as making a Mayday call, with the required information: Mayday, 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 Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, Seneca 10 miles west of Wickham, 3,500 feet, heading 270, 4 on board, fire left engine, intend to land at Oxford. The subsequent actions, such as following the checklist and switching off systems, can be done later. Rule-based behaviours are generally robust in practice and have many strengths. Standardised procedures enable each crew member to know what other crew members should do in a selected situation, thereby acting as monitors of each other's actions. Errors of rule-based behaviour usually occur because of the application of the incorrect rule. For example, by confusing two red warning lights, such as the undercarriage unsafe light and the low voltage light. The use of auditory and visual warnings goes some way to resolving this problem. If a rule is used mistakenly, it will generally be a well-established, rather than a little-used rule, strong but wrong. It will also frequently have an application in a similar environment. For example, the throttle may be moved instead of the mixture lever, both of which are used with a similar frequency and at a similar time. It is unlikely that the radio frequency will be changed in place of lowering the flaps, because their functions are so dissimilar, even though they may be physically located next to each other. Departure from established rules is highly dangerous. For example, a ground proximity warning must not be ignored, and the mandatory rule to pitch up with full power should be obeyed. These prescribed rules are known as Standard Operating Procedures, SOPs, and should cover most eventualities. But where they do not, the pilot must rely on his experience and knowledge, which is what we will now look at. Finally, we come to knowledge-based behaviour, which is that applied when no procedure has been learned or established, such as when completing a jigsaw puzzle. However, situations where there are no rules or procedures to which a pilot can turn will be increasingly uncommon on sophisticated aircraft, because pilot involvement has been designed out as much as possible. Where a novel problem does occur, the pilot must use his knowledge and experience to design a plan for dealing with the situation. And this is done by the central decision maker of the brain, using all the external stimuli and all of the information in the long-term memory. Humans will, if possible, avoid knowledge-based problem solving because it is harder and more time-consuming than rule-based solutions. If one can fit one's actions within a well-tried procedure, one may feel more confident of the outcome than if one were to create a new solution. Professor James Reason has produced his generic error modelling system, which traces the path of human problem solving through the 3 behaviour types of Rasmussen. His conclusion is that, when confronted with a problem, human beings are strongly biased to search for and find a prepackaged solution at the rule-based level before resorting to the far more effortful knowledge-based level, even where this is demanded at the outset. Only when people become aware that successive cycling around this rule-based route is failing to offer a satisfactory solution will the move down to the knowledge-based level take place. Take some time to examine this generic error modelling system model. However, knowledge-based behaviour is more prone to error than skill-based or rule-based behaviour for the reasons that follow. Where a decision at the knowledge-based level is necessary, the use of mental models is required, utilising all of the information available to the pilot from his environment. Evaluation of evidence, however, is not a straightforward process, and the weight placed on individual items will be influenced by a number of factors. The pilot will be heavily influenced by the probability of an occurrence. For example, a bang heard on takeoff could be a tyre bursting, a bird strike, or an engine failure. A burst tyre is the most probable cause, and so pilots may carry out initial drills for that event. Previous experience will also influence a decision. If a pilot recently experienced a component failure, such as an ASI not reading properly, he may look no further than for a faulty instrument if another faulty reading occurs. Whereas the cause may be something different, such as a bird strike to the pitot tube and leading edge of the wing, which will have additional consequences. The incoming information may be incomplete or ambiguous. The redness of the sky could be a setting sun, but it could also be the effect of a volcanic eruption, with the attendant dangers of flying through ash. Once a theory has been formed about a problem, such as not knowing one's exact position, people are reluctant to move away from that theory and start again with a new one. This is especially true if time is short, perhaps as the pilot has to comply with an ATC clearance. Or, if the captain has a strong personality, when he may find it difficult to start again, as it will be a difficult admission of error on his part. Individuals will seek information to confirm their theory rather than to test and challenge it. This is known as confirmation bias. This extract from an aviation chart shows 2 towns with remarkably similar features. Each has a major road running from northwest to the southeast, shown coloured green. Each has a railway, also running from the northwest to the southeast, shown coloured blue. And each has a railway running from east to roughly west, shown coloured pink. The towns are a similar size, and they are both the same distance from the coast. Add some scattered cloud and overconfidence, and we have the components for a wrong decision. The thing that is required for a correct decision is independent confirmation. In this case, a bearing could be taken from Dover VOR or Lyd VOR. A bearing from Manston NDB would be unhelpful, as Canterbury and Ashford are on a similar bearing. Even if the pilot reviews his decision, there is a tendency for him to review only the things that he has considered, and in the same order, causing a check-off illusion, rather than a systematic review of the relevant material. Out of sight, out of mind is a wholly appropriate saying for problem solvers. For example, an old battery may have been left some time ago in a storage compartment, but has now leaked and corroded some electrical cables. It has also been found that people have greater difficulty in identifying symptoms than in producing plausible solutions. This is reflected in the fact that everyone is happy if a reasonable, non-threatening explanation can be given. In an incident in Malaysia, a Boeing flew through the tops of some trees on the approach, and the noise was interpreted as an engine surge, a clearly less blameworthy event than a low approach. Only the subsequent demonstration of foliage in the undercarriage persuaded the crew that the approach may have been a little low. We have seen that the Rasmussen model of behaviour gives rise to various types of error. But there are many other ways to categorise error, such as the design versus operator model. In aviation, emphasis is often placed upon the errors of the frontline operators, who may include flight crew, air traffic controllers, or maintenance engineers. Pilot error was to blame for an Airbus crash in Toronto in 2005, when the pilot touched down too far down the runway and failed to stop. However, errors may have been made by aircraft designers before an aircraft even leaves the ground, such as flawed procedures or false parameters programmed into a flight computer. This was the possible cause of a famous and controversial crash of an Airbus A320 at an airshow in 1988. During a low-altitude flypast, the flight computer did not seem to respond to the pilot's commands to raise the nose and increase engine power. As a result, the aircraft flew into trees at the end of the runway and exploded, killing 3 people. Errors can also be categorized as variable or constant. Variable errors, such as the widespread scatter of bullets being aimed at a bullseye, may be close to attaining their goal, but it is hard to predict where the next bullet will go. Consequently, such errors are harder to control. Whereas constant errors, as in this pattern of bullets, may be greater errors for being further away from the bullseye, but they are more easily predicted and corrected. Another way of categorizing errors is to determine whether they are reversible or irreversible. It is possible to recover from a reversible error. For example, if a pilot lowers his undercarriage during the early stage of an approach, instead of extending his flaps, he can correct this error by raising the undercarriage and extending the flaps. But if he accidentally dumps all of his fuel over the Atlantic, he will not have any options open to him. This will be an irreversible error. Finally, on the subject of errors, we can look at one of the many strategies employed to reduce human error. A leading author in this area is Professor James Reason. He has designed a system called Defense in Depth, or the Swiss cheese model, which is intended to eliminate errors within complex organizations. Here we see a list of possible causes of errors during a flight, depicted as passing through a slice of Swiss cheese, which is full of holes. In order to avoid an error cause, such as defective ATC equipment, defenses, such as spare equipment, should be built into a system at all stages, so that no single error or hole should be catastrophic. Here, we see how each of the error causes is matched by control measures. However, if several defenses are breached or ignored, such as when there are poor air traffic communications, or when a pilot does not believe his instruments, or a pilot disobeys an air traffic instruction, then enough of the holes in the cheese may line up, and a catastrophe may follow. The error causes and control measures shown in the example are derived from the background to a crash in 2002, when 2 aircraft collided over Germany. One of the radar screens was not working at air traffic control, and one air traffic controller had just gone to lie down, as he expected there to be little traffic that night. The TCAS systems of the two aircraft detected a possible collision, as eventually did air traffic control. The pilot of one aircraft obeyed his TCAS instruction and descended, while the other chose to ignore his TCAS instruction to climb and obeyed the air traffic instruction to descend. All of the defences and procedures failed in this case, and the holes in the Swiss cheese lined up. 71 people died, and the father of 2 of the dead children murdered the air traffic controller, ironically a Swiss national. A well-designed system or procedure should mean that errors are spotted, for example by readbacks and checklists, before they do any harm. Extra margins of safety in equipment design and the duplication of equipment provision, known as redundancy, should mean that the failure of one piece of equipment should not be catastrophic. A pilot needs to know exactly where he is at any time, not just where he thinks he is. In other words, he needs his mental model of the environment to match reality. This is called situational awareness. Situational awareness does not refer merely to the aircraft's location, but also to how the aircraft is performing, and how the pilot and his crew colleagues are performing. In order to achieve this state of awareness, it is necessary to avoid visual illusions, to avoid slips and errors, to be alive to forthcoming risks, and to form a correct perception of one's environment. In other words, one needs to be on top of one's flying. Factors which can interfere with situational awareness are stress, interruptions, distractions, fatigue, incorrect mental models, poor communications, boredom, and a lack of preparation. Indicators that situational awareness has been lost would include confusion, fixation on a single item, hurried speech or actions, rushing checks and procedures, straying from approved procedures, taking shortcuts, impatience and mood swings, a sudden decline in flying skills, asking leading questions, unexplained discrepancies between instruments, unusual timing, unexpected results to actions, and a sensation that something feels wrong. These are some of the guidelines to ensure that the best possible situational awareness is achieved and maintained. Gather as much information as possible before making a decision. Take as much time as possible before making a decision. Consider all possible interpretations of the data, not just those that fit one's mental model. Evaluate and reconsider decisions. Devise ways to test your decisions. If information does not fit one's mental model, do not dismiss it. In short, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. We have just seen that all sorts of factors can cause one to make errors. One of the factors which should cause one to make fewer errors and improve performance is motivation. There is no standard definition of motivation, but we can see from this selection of definitions that there must be a reason for trying to achieve a goal. Click on each circle to reveal the statement. Motivation reflects the difference between what a person can do and what he will do. Hawkins in Human Factors in Flight. Motivation is an internal drive to satisfy an unsatisfied need. Higgins. You can take a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. If a man hasn't discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. Martin Luther King. At its most basic level, motivation is driven by physiological needs, such as hunger or thirst. However, the situation is rarely quite so clearly defined. For example, a woman's hunger drive may be modified by conflicting motivation to remain slim. This in turn may be modified, when dining out as a guest, by a desire not to offend the host by rejecting part of a meal. Thus, it is important to understand that a behaviour pattern may be governed by several, often conflicting motives. The one type of motivation with which we are particularly concerned is achievement motivation, which can be defined as the need for success and the need to achieve all of our aspirations in life. Achievement motivation can take an infinite number of forms. For example, a pilot's aspiration to be a check captain, or to be the best swimmer in the club or the world, or to have a stable family. These aspirations drive us all in different ways, and with different degrees of conviction and determination. Motivation can have bad effects as well as the obvious good ones. For instance, ruling the world, as an ambition, may produce a certain resentment in others. On a lesser scale, a commander who is determined to land at the destination airport, regardless of weather conditions, is putting his crew and passengers at risk. Such behaviour is described as having extreme achievement motivation. And although it may produce spectacular results, it is also dangerous. Another danger can occur when an individual who is driven by extreme achievement motivation meets an obstruction, such as the dissenting first officer. This situation can result in aggressive impulses, such as anger, stress, and frustration, all of which can lead to poor judgment and accidents. It is because of such personality problems, as well as for other reasons, that the practice of crew resource management has been developed, a topic which we will come to later. Abraham Maslow developed a theory, the hierarchy of needs, in the 1940s and 50s, for understanding human motivation, management training, and personal development, and it is regarded as the seminal work in this field. In his book, he creates a pyramid of needs, which must be satisfied from the bottom up in turn. You will see from the pyramid that the lowest level of needs is physiological, such as food, water, and shelter. The next level is safety and security, such as safety from violence, security of work, and maintenance of the family unit. They all have to do with a man's yearnings for a predictable, orderly world. Once a person has enough food and security, he needs to feel a sense of belonging and acceptance, whether it comes from large social groups such as supporters clubs, team games, street gangs or colleagues, or it comes from small social connections such as one's family. The next level of need is for self-esteem and to receive the esteem of others. This usually requires people to have an activity that gives the person a sense of contribution, to feel accepted and self-valued. This seems to be particularly true of actors. People with low self-esteem need respect from others. They may seek fame or glory, which again depends on others. Unfortunately, it can result in infamy, such as where quiet or disturbed persons commit gun atrocities to get their moment of glory. Badly behaved children are similarly seeking attention. These first four needs are known as deficiency needs. The individual does not feel anything if these needs are met, but he feels anxious if they are not. This is very similar to the hygiene and motivator elements of Herzberg's work environment theory, which we see later in this lesson. Only when the lower order of needs of physical and emotional well-being are satisfied are we concerned with higher order needs of influence and personal development. For example, it is only when one is comfortable within a group, which is level 3, that one can start to consider achieving some status within that or other groups at level 4. Conversely, there is little point expecting strong teamwork from a team member at level 3 when his house is being repossessed or bulldozed, which is level 2. From a career development point of view, it is essential that management provides a structure for the attainment of status, responsibility and reputation at level 4, and personal fulfillment at level 5. The top slice of the pyramid contains our need for self-actualization. Whereas the deficiency needs may be seen as basic and can be met and neutralized, that is, they stop being motivators in one's life, self-actualization and transcendence are growth needs. That is, they are enduring motivators and drivers of behaviour. It is only when the deficiency needs are dormant that a person can be filled with a desire to learn, explore, discover, and create a better understanding of the world around him. He wishes to realize all of his potential for being an effective, creative, mature human being. Maslow described self-actualization as an episode in which the powers of the person come together in a particularly and intensely enjoyable way, and in which he is more integrated, more open for experience, more idiosyncratic, more perfectly expressive, more humorous, more ego-transcending, more fully human. In fact, Maslow suggests some personal characteristics which are indicative of persons who have attained self-actualization. Here are some of them: a keen sense of reality, regarding problems in terms of challenges rather than as personal complaints or excuses, reliance upon one's own experiences and judgment, having a few close friends rather than many superficial relationships, and also an acceptance of others. If we apply the model to aviation safety, we can see that the ideal is to have a mentally and physically satisfied pilot, who is confidently working as a member of a highly skilled team in order to achieve a trouble-free and safe flight. The purpose of motivation is to achieve a reward, perhaps a financial one, or to achieve a goal, such as a qualification. The value of the reward is obviously highly relevant, such as a large performance bonus. But also relevant is the expectation of reward. For example, how likely is it that one will attain an ATPL qualification, and how will that attainment be appreciated by others? Together, these two factors can be called the utility of the reward. Commensurate to that utility of the reward will be the effort applied to achieve the necessary performance to reach that goal. Both natural ability and learned skills will be applied to the task, but they are also likely to be indicators of how realistic the goal is. As a result of the individual's performance, the rewards emerge, which may be intrinsic, such as feelings of pride or achievement, or they may be extrinsic, such as pay and promotion. One aspect of reward value that we need to look at in greater detail is job satisfaction. Without job satisfaction, it is difficult to motivate an employee to perform well, let alone to improve his performance. Elements in this job satisfaction are its financial rewards, management policies, colleagues, the working environment, and targets. Job satisfaction is measurable through specifically designed questionnaires and interviews, and companies spend a great deal of time trying to achieve a happy and thereby an efficient workforce. The two main tools used to increase job satisfaction are job enrichment and job enlargement, with job rotation as a lesser option. Job enrichment involves active participation of staff in policy and the decision-making process. Thus, cabin crew are involved in decisions as to the timing of passenger meals. Job enlargement increases the number and variety of tasks undertaken. For example, a commander may delegate additional tasks to the first officer, whose role is thereby enhanced. This is called horizontal enlargement. Vertical enlargement increases an employee's control over his own tasks, for example by being involved in his work roster. Finally, in this topic of motivation, we will look at the two-factor theory of Frederick Herzberg. He agreed with the Maslow theory that man is not content with the satisfaction of lower-order needs at work and will seek the gratification of higher-level needs. He developed the Maslow theory by proposing a two-factor model of motivation, based on the notion that the presence of one set of job characteristics, called hygiene factors, leads to dissatisfaction at work, whilst another and separate set of job characteristics or incentives, called motivators, leads to satisfaction at work. Thus, satisfaction and dissatisfaction are not on a continuum, with one increasing as the other diminishes, like a seesaw, but they are independent phenomena, like two separate lifts, one above and one below a neutral position. Put another way, satisfaction comes from the job itself, from the motivators, which have the capacity to gratify needs such as achievement, competency, status, personal worth, and self-realization. Whereas dissatisfaction comes from the job environment, from the hygiene factors, such as policies, procedures, supervision, and working conditions. Hertzberg concluded that a successful implementation of his theories would have these effects on both the individual and the working group. Let us now look at a slightly different topic in the context of error and behaviour, namely decision-making. As most of the flying of a commercial aircraft is done by the autopilot, the autothrottle, and the navigation computers, the pilot's main roles are now those of system management and decision-making, invariably when there is a problem. Decision-making can be defined as the step-by-step scientific process which is followed in order to reach a balanced and factual decision. It is not the same as deciding, which may be arbitrary or based on emotion, and with which we are not concerned. Fortunately, humans have a number of positive capabilities in their decision-making mechanism. Namely, the ability to make decisions very quickly, if involved in a skill-based behaviour, such as collision avoidance, or rule-based behaviour, such as following a checklist. Humans are also very creative and innovative in finding solutions to problems, which accounts for the continuous development of aircraft design. However, humans are subject to many negative factors which cause poor decisions or errors. Some of these are listed here for convenience. Draw the cursor over any word and click for further explanation. Saliency, less obvious cues may be overlooked. Bias, seeking confirmation for a hypothesis. Fatigue, may cause slow reactions. Overload, may be qualitative or quantitative. Overconfidence, causes complacency and poor motivation. Status, will go on, I've never turned back before. Attention, may be distracted or funneled. Experience, new pilots will make slower decisions. Probability, assuming without checking. Procrastination, I'll decide later. Rationalization, that fault always goes away. Hopes, the weather may be better over the hills. Refusal to review, this worked last time. Stress has many causes, such as a lack of time, personal problems, or work conditions. Personality, differences between crew can cause friction and poor decision-making. We will look at this topic in greater detail later. Various approaches to decision-making have been designed, such as this model by Jensen in 1988. The mnemonic DECIDE represents a sequence of events intended to help pilots make effective decisions. Another model, listing risk-based decision-making guidelines, has been designed by British Airways, which uses the mnemonic DODAR. We will look at this model in some detail. First of all, the fault is diagnosed and an objective is defined. Then options are developed, a decision is made, tasks are assigned, and finally the action is reviewed. These steps guide the decision maker along a prepared path of decisions and actions, hopefully to the right solution to the problem. We will expand this model and apply it to the scenario of a fire warning in the cockpit. The first step is to diagnose the problem and define the objective. Is there more than one problem? A fire may cause other lights to flash, such as an electrical short-circuit warning light. Is the aircraft also running low on fuel? Which is the most urgent problem? Confirmation bias may lead to a faulty diagnosis, as where the pilot has had several false alarms already on this flight and assumes that the next time a light appears, it is another false alarm. The time available may be a relevant factor during takeoff or landing. In other stages of flight, time may not be a problem. For example, the aircraft may be put into a hold while the problem is assessed and solved, or a diversion may be possible. Remember that time can often be gained during a flight by proper preparation on the ground. The next step is to collect as much information as possible. Perhaps the flight crew need confirmation from the cabin crew of which engine is on fire. Unbelievably, the pilots of a Boeing approaching East Midlands Airport in 1989 did not seek this confirmation and shut down the wrong engine after a fire warning, leaving them without a live engine. Then, assess the risk. Is it a serious engine fire or not? How many engines do you have? Risk can be defined as anything that could increase the likelihood of an accident occurring. In assessing risk, both the amount and the probability of that risk must be considered. Unfortunately, experiments have found that people tend to overestimate the frequency of a very rare but beneficial occurrence. We often see this tendency in gambling. On the other hand, estimates of the frequency of unpleasant events differ. Well-publicized events, such as air crashes, are overestimated, whereas less well-publicized events, such as near misses, are underestimated. Risk can be categorized in many ways. It can be described as external or objective risk. This means the risk of an accident happening unless something changes. For example, the risk of an aircraft crashing because it has an engine fire. Internal or subjective risk describes the inability of the crew to implement a solution, perhaps because of too little time, too little information, or inexperience. For example, if the crew decides to divert to an airfield because of the fire, but they have left the local map and the aerodrome radio frequencies book in the briefing room, then what was initially a medium risk situation has now become a high risk. The next step is to develop options to deal with the problem. Should you shut down the engine on fire? Or were the sparks and flames caused by the ingestion of a bird, in which case the fire may be over in a matter of seconds? Should you go on or divert? Then weigh up the options. If you do not divert but carry on, is something else unknown likely to happen, such as a loss of hydraulic pressure to the flaps caused in some way by the fire? Decide what to do after assessing the options. In our example, the fire in the engine will be extinguished, the engine closed down, and we will divert to the next suitable aerodrome. Another word used to describe this stage of the process is commitment. It is the point of no return. It may be that a decision must be delayed until more information is available. For example, is the diversion airfield operational? Tasks can now be assigned. The first officer is told to implement the decision. The cabin crew can be asked to confirm visually that the fire is out. Passengers will need reassurance, and air traffic need to know of the change to the flight plan. The execution of the decision needs to be supervised and monitored. The consequences of the actions need to be monitored, and a review carried out of whether the original objective was successfully achieved. If it was not, then the pilot must return to stage 1 and start again. There have been many studies and theories about risk, one of the most prominent being prospect theory, propounded by Tversky and Kahneman. It is based on the idea that people evaluate gains or losses from some neutral or status quo point, an assumption consistent with the adaptation level findings that occur not just in perception, but in virtually all experience. That is, we adapt to a constant level of virtually any psychological dimension and find it to be neutral, such as our perception of what is a high salary. A person earning £20,000 a year will regard £40,000 as a high salary, whereas someone earning £100,000 will regard £40,000 as low. So, our starting point shifts. Once this neutral point is established, Tversky and Kahneman found that people value a gain that is certain more than a gain that is less than certain, even when the expected value of each is the same. As regards losses, people are more risk-seeking when choosing between losses. They will clutch at straws to avoid a certain loss, even if it means taking even greater risks. The prospect theory research project told people to assume that there was a disease affecting 600 people, and they had two choices. Option A, where 200 of the 600 people will be saved, and option B, where there is a 33% chance that all 600 people will be saved, and a 66% chance that nobody will be saved. The majority chose option A, showing a preference for certainty of a gain, that is, people being saved. This is known as risk aversion behaviour. They were then offered two other choices: option C, where 400 people will die, and option D, where there is a 33% chance that nobody will die and a 66% chance that all 600 people will die. Most people now selected option D, seeking to avoid the certainty of loss. This is known as risk-seeking behaviour. It is the wording of the options that makes a difference. A and C are the same, as are B and D. Given two equal choices, one expressed in terms of possible gains and the other expressed in terms of possible losses, people would choose the former. In our example, they chose options A and D. Consider the pilot who has two choices. He can choose to turn back in the face of bad weather, with the certainty of disappointing passengers and incurring considerable hotel and fuel costs. These are certain losses. Alternatively, he can fly on with the chance of nothing going wrong, but with the risk of a catastrophe. These are uncertain but possibly greater losses. Prospect theory suggests that the pilot will choose to avoid the certainty of loss and will fly on. The important point is that if the pilot had framed his choices differently, he may have reached a different conclusion. For example, by emphasizing the certainty of a gain, namely of saving lives, compared to the uncertain gain of not disappointing the passengers by continuing. This completes our study of errors, behaviour, and decision-making.